Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host, Todd Tavares. Moving beyond questions of God's existence, this podcast asks what atheists should be doing next in a godless world.
Hey Nathan.
Hi, Todd.
So, do you have anything happening in life this week?
No, nothing
No.
really. What about you?
No, COVID times, right?
Yes, right, exactly.
I had something happen, and it dawned on me later that someone was trying to set up a fight with me about atheism, but it didn't even check in my head. So it was apropos of nothing. It really came out of nowhere. And it was about how people think religion is really bad, but if you go back in time and look at what they were doing back then, like during the Crusades, that's what everybody was doing. So I responded like in a natural conversational way, like, "Oh, I didn't know you were a moral relativist."
Right.
And then it just stopped. Right. There was
Right.
no follow-up. There was no argument. There was no baiting. Nothing. It just transitioned to something else.
Oh yeah, I see that your point. Yeah, I see your
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, and that was the same thing that happened to me. Is like, why did that conversation didn't go anywhere? I wonder what I said wrong. And it's like, no, because they were trying to pick a fight and prove me wrong, being a horrible person because I'm an atheist.
Right.
When in reality, there are good people and there are bad people. Some good people are atheists and some are religious, and some bad people are atheists and some bad people are religious. Which is, you know what? There was a point there, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
No, I know what the point was.
Uh-huh.
That was something that we had talked about earlier.
Yeah.
On the show, and it kind of came back. It was like, wow, wait a minute. There was some self-defense in there. There was something about who we are and how we engage in the world, and how it allows us to interact with other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
What it means for a relationship. Yeah. I was like, you know what? I think we're doing something, even if it's only me who's listening.
It was episode 3, I believe.
Yes.
So
it's a good
people
one.
can check that out. Yeah. So the person was trying to make the point that, well, you brought up the Crusades, and then they were.
I didn't bring up anything,
Oh.
Nathan. They brought
Okay.
that up. So I think it
okay.
was like excusing past behavior because it was from a different time, which is
okay.
an incredibly anti-Christian point, because
Yes.
the Christian
right.
point would be it's always about love and understanding and whatnot, and killing is wrong, and it's always been wrong, and that's always been the Christian position.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I think that's right.
I mean, I guess
that's funny that the argument just sort of ended there.
Yeah, it was a tremendous success because I didn't even know I was in an argument. So
Right.
yeah,
Yes.
it had that benefit.
Yeah.
So, and that, I guess it depends on what type of Christian you are. Segue, smooth as ice, into what kind of atheists we are.
Right.
So this week's a little different, Nathan. What are we doing different this week?
We're going to be talking about a book called The Seven Types of Atheism by John Gray. I think the book came out maybe a couple years ago. So we're going to just sort of discuss the book. You don't need to have read the book to listen to this.
No,
so we're going to go
after
through.
This, you don't need to. That's
yes, right. We're going to go through and talk about each of the 7 types, and then just sort of discuss along the way what we think about him, and just our general impressions of the book, and like our criticisms and things we think are good about the book, and so on.
Yeah, and this is one that I was drawn to it. Unfortunately, I've got my head in a place, probably the clouds, where like this very intellectual overthinking it, basically. That's the kind of atheism I'm into, thinking about it too much. But it's not meant to be an exhaustive typology. It's not something that you have to be. Basically, John Gray is going to categorize a bunch of people that they fall into two broad camps: the people he likes and the people he doesn't like.
Yeah.
And basically, it's
But yeah, most
he
people he doesn't like.
but he doesn't like most people. Just not a surprise if
Yeah.
anyone knows anything about John Gray. Mostly, it's about like the types of atheism that he doesn't like, but it's something that we need to think about because I mean, it's come up 100 times on this podcast already. 20% of the population in the U.S. is now generic atheists, godless heathens, atheists, agnostics, or none. But the problem with that is it doesn't, nobody really knows what that means. And we've just reached a point now where most people in the United States do not go to church, and it's not just an artifact of COVID. It's been on serious decline over the past 20 years. It's affecting every age group. People are giving up religion in pretty significant numbers. And there's no idea of what this is leading to, where it's going, or even just what it means in the immediate term. So it's something that we need to think about, like who are we? What is it we want? Because clearly it's undecided right now. Or at least
Hmm.
self-reflection and figure out what we are.
Hmm.
So that's what drew me to this book. Nathan, should we get into the? Are you ready to talk about the seven types, or is there anything you want to open with here? Any information you want before we get into it?
I think we should just get into it and then maybe any other necessary things. Oh, I mean, we can talk about definitions maybe.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Why
Because
don't we talk about
yeah,
that
because that's
before?
something that we like. I think when I think about atheism, my meaning is someone who rejects religious authority, maybe even the notion of received wisdom. And is that when you think about beyond atheism, is that what you see in your mind as atheism?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a limited sense it's about rejecting the idea of God. But then, yeah, you can broaden it out into rejecting like more generally, like the supernatural or things like this, or just religion in general. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
yeah.
Rejecting religion, rejecting sort of like those mystic,
Hmm. Hmm.
metaphysical things that,
Hmm.
yeah, that are beyond our ken. Yeah, so John Gray really, really narrows it. And he's saying this is just someone who denies the existence of a creator God. And that's really it. So for him, like the idea, like a monotheist back in the day, well, they were an atheist because they denied these gods. And Buddhists can be atheists if they deny.
Yeah.
Hinduists, they reject, one all powerful being, therefore they're atheists. Whereas like for me, it's still religious. It's religious thinking. It's religious obedience. It's religious structure. It's religious institution. But he doesn't worry about that. He also sees most atheism as, or I think he says all is materialist. It's this very Western concept of a materialist, grounded in the real world. It's not this realm of ideas. We're in this world of physical things.
Everything that exists is just matter. There's no sort of spiritual stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think he also treats he's very broad with religion as well. So, going into it, this is what's meant by atheism. And what we know about Gray is he's what we would call anti-humanist, not in the sense that he hates people. It's not misanthropist, although there are times,
Yeah.
but that he rejects claims about what our human nature is, or that there's a human essence that defines us, or a unifying quality purely from being human. So you can't organize around this idea of being human or really be the central element of what we do. Um, like it's just to him, humans are just sort of animals throughout in the wilderness. They do their own thing. Their own little groups do things their own way. They have different modes of living, different modes of being, and that's it. And definitely throughout, we see that he rejects the idea of progress and
Hmm.
the ability of humans to basically make themselves better.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
we're always going to be just as terrible as we were 6,000 years ago. So,
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
think like this, it seems kind of late in the game. I think this book was 2017. So we're a little late, but he was a little
Right.
late on attacking the new atheists, which I think is where he starts. So this is the first type, right? Nathan, take it
Yes.
away. Tell us about the new atheists.
Yeah. So the first type is these new atheists, and it's one of the ones he doesn't like. Um,
Yeah.
so the new atheists were people. I mean, the main sort of figure of new atheism is Richard Dawkins, and others are like Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens. Although I don't think he actually mentions Hitchens. Anyway, he he sees the new atheists as very unoriginal and sort of uninteresting, really, and sort of simplistic.
Hmm.
So he critiques the new atheists because they see religion as just a system of beliefs
Hmm.
sort of a series of untrue propositions.
Hmm.
So for example, he would say, or I mean, like, a new atheist might say in his view that Christianity is just sort of, a series of truth claims about the world,
Hmm.
like that, the world was created according to the book of Genesis or something like that. So the new atheists think like religious people are just mistaken about these truth claims, and therefore it's just enough to demonstrate that they're incorrect, like the religious people are incorrect.
Hmm.
And to Gray, that's sort of a simplistic view of religion.
Yeah.
What do you think about his critique of the new atheists?
I I think there's something in there about the idea. I think I get this sense from both the new atheists and reading this in Gray, that they kind of believe that being right is enough, right? Like,
Hmm.
Jesus didn't turn water into wine, therefore it's not true, therefore I'm right and you're wrong. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
that's kind of the feeling I get. And I think his, like, when he makes that critique writ large, like, that's not what religion is about, that's not how it works, it's a misunderstanding of, it's a misapplication of logic, because it's not meant to be reasonable or rational, because humans aren't reasonable or rational.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think it's pretty on the nose. And it should be said here that he, like, John Gray is trying to have it both ways. He's being a little sneaky. He's being cheeky, I think. Where he says,
Hmm.
like, I'm just describing people. I'm not telling you what you should or should not believe. Just saying, like,
Right.
these are the types. But he very
Yeah.
clearly thinks, like, these guys are wrong. And you
Yeah,
should not
that's
be
true.
this way.
Yes. Yeah.
Now,
I mean, I guess, yeah. Oh, no, we should just say, I mean, I don't think we said at the start, but like Gray himself is an atheist. So it's not
yeah,
as though he's criticizing the new atheists from a religious perspective. He's
mm,
criticizing them
great
from
point.
sort of a fellow atheist perspective, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Which is, like, I mean, it's something that we're going to need to do. This is a discussion that we're
Yeah.
going to need to have. So, how do you think it's an accurate description of new atheists? Is there anything you would add or subtract?
I think the funny thing is that new atheists are often criticized for having a simplistic picture of religion. And I think there's something to that. But then I think people often have a simplistic picture of the new atheists.
Yeah,
So I think that they would probably, if you drilled down to that, like, and asked them about, is religion, do they really think that religion is just about a series of truth claims? They would probably say no, that there's more to it than that. Like,
yeah,
but in insofar as, like, I agree with Gray's critique that religion is more than that. But I
yeah,
think probably someone like Dawkins would probably agree that would probably agree with that. Yeah.
yeah. Do you have a guy? Who's your who's your new atheist guy? Which one of the four horsemen?
um I don't know. I mean, I'm a Sam Harris fan, I would say, although many people dislike him
Hmm,
these days.
that's all
uh,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, I liked
Um,
Hitchens. Hitchens was my guy, but the war really,
yeah.
that kind of disgusted me. But
Right. His support of the
the Iraq
Iraq
War,
War.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. There,
Um,
there was one more point I was going to make about the new atheist. Oh, I mean, just one other thing, that Gray sort of criticizes them for saying he criticizes the new atheists for criticizing Christians for believing that, like, the book of Genesis is sort of an accurate, a literal
mm,
description of what happened.
yeah,
And Gray devotes a lot of this chapter to saying that actually, there's this tradition of viewing Genesis as allegory, in Christianity. And I think that's true, but it's also true that many Christians do take the book of
You-
Genesis literally.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
it's not as though the new atheists are attacking a straw man. I mean, plenty of people
Yeah.
do believe that. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's usually the ones that the new atheists are attacking.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, so that makes sense. So
Mhm.
we've got that. By the way, the book is a very breezy read. It's slender.
Yeah.
I guess it's I don't know. How would you describe it? As very philosophical or
Yeah, I
like
would say so.
very
Yeah.
okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Intellectual. I used to get
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a short read, but it's also quite dense, I would say. I
Yeah,
think
and
some
it's
chapters anyway.
yeah, so it's got these two things working against it. It is both very dense and also very breezy. It's not a very deep analysis of all these things.
Yeah.
It's more of a thumbnail sketch of everybody. So it's okay if we don't spend a lot of time. So that's why we can move on to the second group, which are the secular
Yes.
humanists. And this is again like well we know secular. So humanists are people who they're focused on humanity, improving humanity over time. And what Gray sees is that they have inherited this notion of progress from Western Christianity, right? So all it is they've taken Christian ideals, stripped out Jesus, put it in secular clothing, dressed it up real pretty, and this is what's leading us to this leading humanity to this moral or ethical better place, a better world through better ethics. So, and it gets to skip over the deep sort of Plato stuff. Basically, all of these notions that we have in Christianity that are otherworldly become very worldly in secular humanism. So you know the way that a sinner can be redeemed and move on to the paradise of heaven. You can also take bad people, right? Imperfect, flawed humans, and somehow through better institutions, by improving the world, lead to a nice place on earth, right? That's the goal.
Mm.
And he says this is all they've done is taken Christianity and mapped a secular version on top. It's like the Jefferson Bible, right? You're just stripping
Mm.
out all of the godly
Right.
stuff. And the basis, part of his claim, is that it's this is built on something that is just as mystical and spiritual and otherworldly as Christianity, right? This idea of God in heaven. Well, we have human progress, and we can build around humanity. He sees there's he says that's all hoo ha, and he sees this in pretty much everybody in the Western canon. So the idea like if you've got like liberal universalism, the idea like, oh yeah, we're all born with these rights. They can be applied to everyone. What's good for me is good for you, is good for everyone. That's just basically they've just taken Christianity and reformulated it for everybody.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so even people like Nietzsche, right? This idea of the redemption of man through the Übermensch, that's just Christianity. And even Ayn Rand, who the only woman he discusses, she's humanist in the sense that she wants to improve the human condition. So as bleak and miserable as a lot of her stuff is about people, what she ultimately says is that we can improve the human condition. So that's humanist. And somehow there's connective tissue there from Christianity.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, okay. I got to jump to the critique
Okay.
immediately because there's a
Yes.
point where it's like, so what? Right?
Yeah.
Like
Mhm. Mhm.
the whole everything's inherited from something else. So this
Mhm.
is like what this immediately makes me think of is like Christmas. I celebrate Christmas with
Right.
my family,
Right.
right?
Yes.
We never talk. We have a giant tree and
Mhm.
gifts. We never talk about Jesus, right?
Yeah.
That's all we do. And then you have Christians being like, "Hey, you put Christ back in Christmas." And for us, it's like, no, this is a secular holiday. It's been completely changed. And if you go far enough back in Christianity, they just took a pagan holiday and made it Jesus Day. So this like the roots of this thing, I don't see why that matters. I think the idea that it was secularized is fine. Like,
Yeah.
I don't get why that's it's bad. I don't see the religious thinking if you've removed it from God.
I think it's a good example to use like Christmas. I mean, and I think probably John Gray would say like, aha, like if you still celebrate Christmas, like you really haven't, you're not a real good atheist
Right.
because you haven't thrown off all the trappings of Christianity or religion.
Exactly. You
Yeah,
need to totally do it.
yeah,
It needs to be
yeah,
completely revolutionary.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think the one
No.
thing I think maybe the point I might say there's some merit for Gray's point is there some kind of like faith aspect to the
Mm,
like these stories of progress that like it's not something that you know for sure. Like if you just I mean it's like Ayn Rand or John Stuart Mill or any of these figures he talks about, like if people only would follow their political ideas, then we'd have kind of a perfect or more perfect world or an improving world. So there's some sort of like faith aspect to that. And I think that maybe there's something to that critique, but I mean I think I agree like overall with your point.
no. No, that's
Um
a thank you for the corrective, because I think that, like, gotta fight for the author a little bit
yeah,
here.
yes.
'Cause
Yeah.
that's true. So we can see, and I don't think he makes this point explicitly, but definitely, right? There is this notion of faith in improvement,
Mhm. Mhm.
because it's not a science, unlike the
Yeah.
third group, which
Mhm.
are, right. It's the atheists, the atheism of science, right?
Yeah.
So how does
It's
that one
yeah.
work?
There's a lot of overlap with the secular humanism one, which is the second. So this like atheism of science is his third type. Basically, in this case, he's talking about atheists who take science and more specifically the idea of evolution as an ethical program, so that evolution itself is a good to be pursued, and one should gear institutions and so on and ethics to kind of fulfilling evolution in that, and then evolution will lead us to again like a more perfect humanity and a perfect state. And even in some cases, in some cases there's this idea of transhumanism, which is this idea that eventually technology will progress or evolve to such a state that humanity can almost transcend itself,
Mm,
that you could potentially upload your consciousness or something to like a cloud computer or something, and
yeah.
you kind of you transcend the human body. And I think there's yeah similar ideas like with different institutions that you can see within communism, for example, like in the Soviet Union, the idea of not just creating like a new kind of political system but creating like a new kind of human
Mm,
because of this. And also from a liberal kind of perspective, he mentioned someone like Francis Fukuyama who talked about the end of history
yeah.
in the soon after the Cold War, which said that basically societies were evolving to become like all democracies, and then
Yeah.
like once this happened, we would reach the end of history, and there was not, uh, and then like
Right.
basically all the changes, all the major changes would have happened, and there would still be interpersonal conflicts and so on, but pretty much that issue would be resolved.
Right.
Um, so yeah,
Which is
so
exactly what happened.
yeah,
If I
right,
remember things, just
yeah,
after the year 2000 correctly.
yeah, yes. So anyway, I think there's a lot of overlap between the second and the third, but this is specifically kind of like almost worshiping science, maybe worshiping evolution.
Yeah, and I mean so. I mean, to build on it a little bit, I am reminded of atheists I've met and had discussions with, where anytime some sort of social problem came up, social issue, or something that needed to be solved, collectively, it'd be like, well, and you ask them, well, how do we do this? And they just point to their cell phone. Yo, you get an app, right? And then it does this, or like, look, you got your phone. This has got it's full of technology. You can you've got more computing power here than NASA did in the
Mm,
60s.
mm,
And that idea, like, it's science, everything that we have that's a social problem or collective problem
mm,
can easily be resolved through
yes,
knowledge and study and the right
right.
formula, right?
And
Whereas,
yeah, and applying science and technology
Yeah.
and to the problems,
Yeah.
as if you can sort of sidestep ethical questions by
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know if God, is this. Oh yeah, yeah. I think it does come up in this, and I'm not sure which of the new atheists does this. Designs says like we can use science to
Mm.
design ethics. We can
Yeah,
measure it,
that's yeah,
quantify it, and enact
yeah.
it.
That's Sam Harris.
That's Sam Harris.
Yes.
That's your guy.
Yeah,
We got to
sorry.
give him a call. Got to get him on the line.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think in that case, that is it's pretty much utilitarianism, which basically is a late 18th century, early 19th century philosophy, which just says that the goal of ethics should be maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. And I think Sam Harris is to apply some kind of science to this, although it's not. It's
yeah,
I don't know. I don't. I think it's pretty much just utilitarianism,
yeah,
which
yeah.
I mean,
With a techno fix, right? This
yeah,
like I
yeah, that's
mean
true.
to steal from South Park, it's the underpants gnomes, right? Like the first step is you measure happiness.
Mhm.
The question, then the second step is a question mark, and the third step is we have a new ethics, right? And
Right.
that's when he points to his
Yeah.
cell phone. It's like, yeah, this thing can figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think this is too much of a tangent, maybe, but I mean, I think utilitarianism is pretty good as a form of ethics, but yeah. But anyway.
Well, I think utilitarianism comes up a bit in the next part
Okay.
because
Right.
it's
Okay.
in the like atheism, Gnosticism, and political religion. So, and then this is a bit more mystical, and it builds on the point you made earlier about sort of like that having faith. This is more about like having a secret knowledge. This idea of Gnosticism, where what it is you have, like the mystics, like the priests, you have the key, or someone has the key to a better society, and you just need to follow them and believe them and do what they say and change in that way, and then we'll all get to this collective utopia. And so it's this idea of basically what he's saying is it's salvation through knowledge, right? Which is the same as any Gnostic religion. The Gnostics had the idea of like uh there's a the demiurge, right? There's like jokester gods who went and created a malformed world, and you need to, once you see that the right way, you can understand how you're being deceived by the world, and once you have the secret knowledge that allows you to unlock it, then you can thrive and either achieve the next level, or like in Scientology, or solve the problems like in QAnon, things like that. So he sees this as the actions are secular, right? Because he applies this to big radical social movements, building from a theocratic revolution in the medieval times. He says that plays out. This town trying to build a utopia on Earth is exactly what the Jacobins did in the French Revolution. It's what the Soviets did. It's what the Nazis did. Saying that even though they have these secular revolutions, it's really this repressed religious urge and the continuation of monotheism, because they all follow this same script, according to Gray. The world is flawed. You have these ideas of an improved and future life, and you basically worship them. They become a huge part of your life. Someone knows what to do. It's through a revealed knowledge or secret knowledge that only they have access to. And then you have to remake the world through cataclysmic change. And Gray says not only is that the French Revolution, the Fascist Revolution, the Soviet Revolution, it's also part of evangelical liberalism, which is spreading universal human rights. I think he goes so far as to say, like, even the Middle East, in the Afghanistan and Iraq, that's what they're doing, which of course
Yeah.
they very clearly are not. But that sort of, at least that framework, right? We're spreading democracy is this same story. It's this religious tale that's being retold in a different setting.
And I think my critique of this is the fourth type. I mean, my critique is I think like the French revolutionaries, I would say, were kind of atheist secular, and the definitely like the Soviets were, but the Nazis, I think it's a lot more complicated,
Super. Yeah.
and also like the thing about like that you mentioned at the end about this idea of spreading democracy and so on by the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, those were not. I'm just thinking about like
Yeah.
George Bush leading these like.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not. It's definitely not straightforwardly secular,
No.
or atheistic. So I think, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's
yeah.
a real muddled one. And also, so part of the critique would also be like, you're creating this lineage that just doesn't exist. The Munster Rebellion, which was completely theocratic, very small, and very short lived, does not have this sort of connective tissue to these world shaping events. It's just not there. I don't see it there. There are plenty of, you can choose any other sort of micro revolution that occurred in between, and it'll have as more and make more sense. I mean, definitely, if you're going to compare, the communists are directly inspired by the French Commune, which has some connection to the French Revolution. Like it's, but also the French Commune looks exactly like peasant revolts. It looks exactly like decolonization, right? There are all sorts of these organic uprisings that play out in almost the exact same way. And to say that this is formulated on this same sort of mindset as the Munster Rebellion, which was completely theocratic with the intent of building a priest led communist society on Earth. It's just, I don't see it there. However, to the point that you made earlier, is that like it does take a lot of faith
Hmm,
to
yeah.
to if you're in on this revolution, you have a lot of faith in it. And is that what's best? Is this the best use of our time to aim at cataclysmic change? Right? Like if we're going to engage in a project of, say, greater secularization, should it look like the French Revolution? Should it look like the Soviet Revolution? Is that what we're looking at? And yeah, and just move on, because I mean, we're people who say, well, okay, we don't believe in God. Other people believe in God. How are we going to live in a world with them? That's one thing. Without saying like storming heaven and attacking God and saying, tell your people to shut up, because we just can't do that unless you can. Which I'm trying to get to the next one, which is the God haters.
Uh,
That's type
yeah.
5. What
Hmm.
are what's their deal? What's happening there?
That's it's pretty straightforward in the name that they well it's they hate God in John Gray's formulation. But it's complicated because obviously there's some contradiction. Like if you're an atheist, obviously you don't think God exists, so it doesn't make sense to hate God.
Mm,
So anyway,
yeah.
so the people he talks about are somewhat it's a bit more maybe abstract than that. So like he talks about the Marquis de Sade, who
Mm,
was a character in the late 18th century, around the time in France and around the time of the French Revolution,
mm.
and he's where we get the word sadism from. He was a kind of a how would you how
You
would you
might
describe
describe
him?
him as a sadist.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's a good way. Yeah, I mean, he was very much into like the idea of finding pleasure in like enacting cruelty on other people, and like sort of fantasizing about it in writing or doing it in actuality. But anyway, I think the way Gray takes him is Marquis de Sade was like kind of talking about how nature has made him this way, makes people seeking pleasure through cruelty like they want someone to blame.
Yeah.
And then Marquis de Sade is sort of like angry at nature for the way it's kind of created him and created
Mm,
humanity,
mm,
and the way John Gray sees this as him, if for Marquis de Sade, that it's God is just sort of or nature as a stand-in for God.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Other people he talks about, in the writer, Dostoevsky, he talks about how he couldn't accept God when there was such cruelty in the world.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
like building from the problem of evil.
Yeah.
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 Which I think
Yeah.
is a pretty normal thing. I think a lot of people have been sort of introduced or introduced themselves to atheism through the problem of evil. I'm not sure who it was. I think it was either David Attenborough or Stephen Fry. I'm not sure. Apparently, in my mind, he's British, whoever he is. When sort of asked why they became an atheist, I think it was like a fly, I think it's in Africa, that apparently infects children through their toes and grows in their eyeballs and bursts out. And the the obvious conclusion is like, if God made these animals, like God is an asshole and there's no way, doesn't deserve being worshipped. Like how it's this is the problem of evil, right? Like how if God is all powerful and all good and loves us and wants us to thrive, why is he making these little animals that are blinding children just for walking barefoot in water? And I think then, but then the weird thing is, and this is, I think, the great transition that most atheists make is that move from there's evil in the world, it's horrible, these terrible things happen, God is terrible, but it doesn't become nature is terrible, right? That's the thing that
Mm,
I've never seen,
yeah.
especially like that you're able to live in this cruel world because there is no God is, I think, more interesting.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. You wouldn't hate nature. It wouldn't make sense to do
Right.
that. It's like, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, but I
yeah.
think that's the astounding thing, but I'm sure there are atheists who haven't sort of made that leap.
That's true. I mean, it's like if you're walking outside and it's like starts to pour rain on you and you just sort of like shake your fist at the sky. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously you're angry, but it's like you're not
Yeah.
really, like, you're looking for something to be angry at, but obviously you can't be angry at a um at nature itself. I mean, that
Yeah,
wouldn't make sense.
yeah, right, yeah.
Uh yeah.
Because yeah, and there's a change that happens when you go from like an omnipotent being who's responsible for your suffering to just this random contingent system that you're sort of
Mhm,
stuck inside of. But it does seem like, yeah, like he kind of puts on Desaad like these things where like there's not he still has this misplaced anger, and it's really kind of on this God
mhm.
figure,
Yeah, yeah. I think
I
that
suppose.
it could be something to that critique.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the those five types that we've talked about, those are all the ones that Gray really dislikes, I guess, or doesn't.
Mm,
He doesn't like that type of atheist. But then the final two types, he does like,
yes.
I would say.
Yeah. And yeah, so the sixth type that he talks about are the atheists without progress. So this is where you can be there's atheism, there's no God, but humans don't really progress. There's no betterment. They don't improve. And like we were saying with like that move to nature, and which I think is kind of the point that he was making through this transition, is that like if you go from this system where you're hating God to one where you're comfortable in a sort of random universe, that's okay, right? Like that he likes that part. So there were like Santayana was a philosopher in the early 20th century who was an atheist but ended up spending his retirement living with the Order of Blue Nuns in, I think, believe it was Italy. And he was very comfortable with there being no order in the universe. And there are people who are skeptical of humanity, or even if they're willing to try new things, but they know that it's not really going to make anything better. So I think the most interesting one was Joseph Conrad that he talks about, who was the author of Heart of Darkness, about taking a boat through the Congo, made into a movie as Apocalypse Now. And if you imagine that terror of the universe that you see in that chaos that you see in and horror, in something like Apocalypse Now, definitely skeptical about humanity, very skeptical about your ability to improve things or having a system that works, and realizing that humans are capable of incredible brutality and horror just to keep things pleasant where they are. Right. So even if we think we've improved it here, it's possible that we've just moved it somewhere else. That the humans aren't really going to improve themselves. And one of the great metaphors that Conrad used was like a ship sort of lost on the ocean, and everyone's trying to survive with against this merciless ocean, right? And that's kind of what life without God is, right? The earth without God is just this indifferent machine, not even machine, this indifferent force that can randomly destroy you at any moment. And you have to just be comfortable with that fact and find ways to survive and get through it
Hmm.
without
Hmm.
any hope that you're ever going to make things better.
And I think an additional point is that there's also no kind of greater meaning to it either. I think in their view.
Mm,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, certainly not through humanity.
yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
right.
There's no like cosmic significance or something like that, I don't
No,
think.
no, absolutely, absolutely not that. Which I think, and this is really close to the second one that he
Yeah.
likes.
Yes. So yeah.
And
So the seventh in total. Yeah.
this, yeah, it seems that they overlap a bit. It's the seventh one is the atheism of silence.
Hmm.
And what's that one about?
It's really similar, I think, to the previous one. It's almost similar to like ancient Stoicism, which
Mm,
is to just sort of accept the universe as it is and accept things how they are. So the first person he talks about is the philosopher Schopenhauer from the 19th century. His idea is just sort of rejecting the will,
mm,
like your will to I guess to do this or that, and just sort of accept the reality for what it was, and just kind of let nature do its thing, and don't worry about it pretty much.
yeah. Even though he seemed to have in the his writing about Schopenhauer, he Schopenhauer really seems to follow his will and desires and basically become like a quasi hedonist.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and the other person he talks about is the philosopher Spinoza,
Mm,
who again is sort of sees, well, Spinoza is complicated somewhat because he sees God as everything in the
yeah.
universe is God. All matter is equivalent with God, and that there is no like the universe is sort of determined, like its fate is determined, and everything in it is determined. So there's not much you can do except just sort of accept your fate.
And but also do whatever you want. Do what you think is right to do, which is the amazing thing. He loved Spinoza rejected free will but loved freedom. So, these are the seven. We've got these. So working backwards, the atheism of silence, who are basically Stoics, atheists without progress, who kind of accept this universe. And then we've got God haters, Gnostics with political religion, the atheism of science, secular humanists, and the new atheists. Yeah, which one are you? Did you find yourself in any of these?
That's a good question. Haven't thought about that. I would say, hmm, I might say some combination of like one, two, and maybe six. I guess so. That
Right.
would be like the
Yeah.
new atheists, secular humanists,
Yeah.
and then the atheists without progress. I would say some combination of that. Yeah.
Mm.
What about you?
No, I didn't
Okay.
see myself in there at all. I don't.
Yeah. That's yeah.
Um.
That's funny. Yeah.
And yeah, and it's. I mean, some of the descriptions are trying to scan through it and think quickly here. No, I think when I read through, I didn't.
Hmm.
What was really good is the way it sets up a lot of these sort of traps that you might fall into. But I
Yeah.
think a
That's true.
lot of them are, I mean, a lot, exaggerating here. Yeah, it sets up these sort of intellectual traps and things that we need to be cognizant of designing our own future, which is why I think I didn't see myself in here because none of these are us. I mean, especially when you get to the end. with
Mhm.
6 and 7. He's
Mhm.
basically saying, don't even try. Progress is not
Yeah.
possible,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Right.
And so, in a way, here's where I agree, right? Any change that we make that we say is based on good, right?
Mhm.
We're better people now. That's
Yeah.
because we've changed what better means. We've changed what good means. Good is historical. And when we make those changes, they only suit the time, all right? Like you go back to the 1840s, you can be a really good slave owner,
Yeah.
right?
That's true.
Like
Yeah.
that fits the time. Only going to our idea of good changes over time. People, I do believe people can change to match that. I mean, did you know that if you go back to like the 1930s, I think, and maybe a little further back, but by 1930s, no one would stop when they saw a red hexagon. Can you believe that? Isn't
Mm.
that crazy? How the hell did
Right.
people learn to do that? And they learned
Yeah.
to do it when no one's around. Right?
Mhm.
Like you
Right.
can totally
Yeah.
change people's behaviors, their idea of
Yeah.
what's right.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so we know that they can change it, but it's only based on what's good at that time, and it can change back in an instant. And we know that, just from any study of history, we know that it's not permanent. And
Yeah.
what I've started to think, and like, okay, because there are things that we know would make things a lot better now, and that religion is part of what's standing in the way. So here's one that I don't know if you've ever run into this. Women have to get their birth control every month. If a woman is on the pill, she has to go to the doctor every month to get a new prescription, right? In the US, this is how we do it. You don't need to do it that way. You can make it a
Mhm.
year. 6 months would
Yeah.
be better, right? It can be a year.
Mhm.
You can
Mhm.
make it over the counter.
Mhm.
These are things that are, by our standards, better, and
Yeah.
they're pretty
Yeah.
easy to do. And
Mhm.
we can make this change, and it would make someone's life better.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
there's no denying that. So to say like, yeah, you can't do anything and hand wave it away, that's problematic because you can. And the flip side is if you tell people not to do anything, don't bother, it doesn't mean that your adversaries, the people who are working against your interests,
Right.
are not going to do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I
That's true.
think I see in myself as an atheist that struggle is part of it. It's not
Mm.
necessarily about
Mhm.
winning. It's not about progress. It's not about advancing towards this utopia. It's about being having this active engagement and attempting to do it. Right? It's this praxis that the way that we live is through this betterment. And it's something that we've been through. I mean, I think in many ways becoming an atheist has made me a better person, at least to myself,
Mm.
like having to take on this challenge, work through it, and become it. So yeah, I don't that's a frustration, this idea of like when progress becomes antipathy or apathy.
Mhm. 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 Yeah. I sort of feel like there's no iron law of that progress will happen. And I mean, I think that's sort of one of Gray's points. But I do think like definitely things have improved. I mean, there's no doubt that like things are a lot better in terms of things like human rights or so on, like from, in the 19th century till now. I mean, there's no question they're better, like
Yeah.
for in all sorts of ways. And there's no like, and we can, yeah, like you say, like we can work to improve things now. And I don't think that's like a sign of like we're just we're just sort of like filling in God with some like other kind of faith. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think that's a good conclusion. I mean, I almost feel like for Gray, like you are a bad atheist if you're not just like a miserable person who just like sits around and like talks about what a meaningless the universe, how meaningless the universe is and stuff.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of like his choices are kind of bleak, right?
Hmm.
The ones
Hmm.
that he admires.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it's weird. So he does this a few times. He kind of contradicts himself, and I assume knowingly that because he should know better. But like that, he talks about how Nietzsche's asceticism, his like rejection of the worldliness, is part of this religious tradition. But with
Mm.
Spinoza, it's just like, well, it's how he chose to live his life.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? It's like, what? And he another
Yeah,
time
that's
he
true.
talking about Nietzsche, he's like, like about how his people could have pointed out to him that you can draw true conclusions from false premises, right? By accident. It's the genetic fallacy. Like, you can just because the Nazis built the first highways doesn't mean highways
Right,
bad.
right. Yeah.
Right? You can't say, like, oh, you want to build a highway? What are you, a Nazi? Nazi's bad. Everything they do is bad. Therefore, highways are bad. That doesn't make sense. But everything he argues in this is like, well, this all came from religion, and it's yeah. So he must be aware of it. I guess that's why he's just describing this.
Yeah.
But he is. I find him more fun when he's on your side. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you want an intellectual introduction to some atheism, but by no means all, like, this is the very philosophical side of atheism. This is a fun way to do it. Having John Gray rag on people is pretty
hmm
fun. Like, I can
Yeah,
enjoy that.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like, it's good fodder for discussion and, like, for thinking about these issues. Yeah, like, he raises sort of, like, fundamental questions about, like, why do we think there is such a thing as, like, human improvement and so on, and, like, why do we well, one interesting thing I liked, he mentioned, I think it was Joseph Conrad, he was talking about it in that section, but just about there's some idea from Socrates, I guess, that like the examined life is a good life,
Mm,
and I think it's
yeah.
Conrad who says like, well, I don't know that that's true. Like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. I've done it. It's not worth it.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, yeah, and I think that's sort of like, and then like John Stuart Mill has something about like, it's better to be like a human being who's miserable than a pig who's happy because you as a human like you're able to like understand the world in a more full way than a pig. But again, like I think Gray would sort of question, like not that he would necessarily disagree, but he would at least question, like, is that true? I mean, to be
Yeah.
like a miserable person, or is it better to be the happy pig? I don't
Exactly.
know. Yeah.
Especially if what you're measuring in the world is happiness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it does sharpen the eye a bit to think about
hmm
things this way.
hmm Yeah. One other point that we
Okay, are
need.
we shit talking now, or is that?
No, no. I mean, I wanted to make one other kind of criticism, I guess, of the book. Just that so many of the authors are like pretty much wealthy white guys,
Mm,
and I think sometimes that can be kind of like a superficial criticism to make of a work. But I think in this case, like it's actually important because so many of them, I think like Schopenhauer, who was in the final type,
yeah,
like he was just sort of well off, and like he just had a lot of time on his hands to
yeah.
like write about philosophy and just sort of ponder things and go to the opera and stuff. And a lot of like his figures are like this, that they've just got the time on their hands, that and also like they're not really having to struggle for anything for the most part. So
No,
it's
yeah,
it's sort of yeah. hmm
yeah, yeah. He says it in the very end. He's like Spinoza, who was the only one who faced
right.
persecution in his life,
Yeah, right.
right? Like,
Yeah,
wh- that's it.
yeah.
Like, whereas it is for like people certainly outside of the U.S. There are people atheists who it might lead to a death sentence. We know that still exists in the world, and there are parts of America today where it's still bad to be an atheist. You can lose your friends and family. You can be ostracized. Clever people can find ways to deny you a job. Yeah, and he'll just leave that out. And that ending, it strikes me as like, a bunch of low income earners going to see a motivational speaker, and the guy gets up there and tells everybody, like, look, I know you're working at Burger King, you're a greeter at Walmart, but you saw me drive in that brand new Mercedes Benz, but let me tell you something. It's not that great. I worked hard to make $1 million, thought it would make me happy. I wasn't happy. So I made 10 million bucks, and you know what? I wasn't happy. Then I made 100 million, and that's when I realized money doesn't make you happy. Okay, that like
Yes.
yes, of course you're worth
Right.
$100 million,
Yeah.
and you figured that out, and now
Right.
you can relax. And I've got to go back to mopping floors at Burger King.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it, of course, like from this, yeah, there really is for the most part this kind of privileged position, and we know it. People like Russell and
Hmm.
Mill
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
Bentham to a certain extent. I mean, Marx and Nietzsche are really weird cases, and
Hmm.
Ayn Rand, who's the only woman,
Yeah.
and there is in the Western tradition, there are lots of women atheists, there are lots of
Yes.
women writers. Lots of people have contributed to what we would consider an atheist canon, which we someday should try to figure out. So there are a lot of blind spots in
Hmm.
this,
Hmm. Hmm.
which we can't overlook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just think, yeah, if he were to take a maybe like other atheists into account, maybe he might come up with other types. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he does talk about how he was inspired by
Hmm.
Epson's book, The Seven Types of Ambiguity, I think is what it was called. So he definitely made the categories fit the book.
Yeah. Right.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it could have been the two types of atheists, right?
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
And it might have had a little more depth to it,
Hmm.
and or the 22 types, and it
Yeah.
could have given us a lot of other people. But it's not really the intent of this book. This is definitely a little bit. It's a jab at the um, new atheists. It's a bit of promoting the view that he sees as important. It's a bit of an overview of atheist thought, of like formal, the kind of atheist thinking you would get in a university classroom, or not, depending
Hmm.
on the
Hmm.
university.
Right.
Because I think a lot of these aren't really taught. So if you want an introduction to that and find people are really interesting to read about and a lot of interesting history, although the Nazis, come on,
Yeah.
seriously. I was at a friggin' flea market in Eastern Europe, and I mean it was a post-Soviet country or post-communist country, and so everything was just like, just crazy communist crap.
Hmm.
And one dude had Nazi stuff that I'm pretty sure his father, maybe his grandfather,
Oh, right.
had taken off like dead Nazis. We're in partisan country, right?
Hmm. Right.
And
Right.
so one of the things he had was a Nazi belt buckle, and
Hmm.
it's got the swastika and it says "God mit uns," right? God is with us.
Hmm. Hmm.
You're gonna tell me this is an atheist movement? Like
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
sending millions of troopers across the land wearing a badge that says God is with us. Oh,
Yeah.
that's madness.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are things that feel egregious, but it's a fun read and I enjoyed it, and we could probably talk for 2 or 3 more hours about
Hmm.
this one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think we covered the types, and I think we covered our kind of critiques about it, and some of the like when what we thought was good about it too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, right. So I guess we can just kind of wrap up by plugging our usual stuff,
Yeah.
which
Eh,
is go
no.
ahead.
Oh no, no. I have nothing to offer here, Nathan. It's
Oh,
all you.
in
Yeah.
terms of okay, you can follow me on Twitter at Nath G Alexander, and
And you cannot follow me on
right,
Twitter.
right.
I'm on Facebook, but I do not go there. I have not been there in a while. I'm not gonna be there. Don't worry.
Yeah. But you've got a Medium page where you're writing
Where I
about.
have not been writing
Oh, okay.
anything. I have not been doing any of that.
Okay.
I am so far behind. Yeah, yeah, because
Right.
I've been busy. I've been reading this book. Took
Yeah,
uh,
that's true.
took
Right.
took me a month. It's a quick
Yeah.
read. Yeah, yeah. I don't have much going on. Yeah. You know what? I was inspired by this book, and I was like, you know what? It's the will. The will is the problem. The universe is chaos. The world is madness. I'm just gonna chill out, sit here with my cat. That's it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very stoical. Um, and so people
uh,
should subscribe to the podcast
yep.
and
push the button, ring the bell, pull the string, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you to
Like,
Red Japan again.
yeah. Yes.
Note for note perfection. I don't know how they do it every week.
Yeah. And we should also just say that on the Anchor site, there's a button where you can, if you want to support the podcast by donating money, you're able to, if you think it's valuable and so on. And we'd really appreciate that. All right.
But I mean,
So
donation, that's a Christian thing, isn't it?
I
Why
think
would
it
atheists?
can be an atheist virtue as well. Yeah.
All right, that
Uh,
sounds fantastic. Until next
all
time.
right.